On a fog-shrouded morning along California's Highway 89, an emergency call shattered the dawn silence at the Wildlife Conservation Center. The caller had discovered a small bobcat cub lying on the shoulder of the busy highway, apparently struck by a car while trying to follow her mother and siblings across the road. Her family had vanished into the forest, leaving her broken, frightened, and alone. For seasoned wildlife rehabilitator Margaret Wilson, it was a race against time, a familiar scenario with heartbreakingly low odds. What follows is a journey of remarkable resilience, an unlikely bond, and a fight for life that begins with a desperate plea. Will this tiny bobcat cub returning once again to the home she was meant for? Stay with us as this story of survival takes a turn that will melt your heart. Before we start, hit the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. The morning fog still clung to the pine trees along Highway 89 when Margaret Wilson's cell phone rang at the Northern California Wildlife Conservation Center. As the lead wildlife rehabilitator, she'd grown accustomed to early morning emergency calls, but something in the caller's voice made her grip the phone tighter. "I'm at the Shell station near mile marker 42, the man said, his voice shaking. "There's a baby bobcat here. I saw it get hit by a car about 20 minutes ago. The mother and other cubs made it across, but this one, it didn't make it in time." Margaret's heart sank. Bobcat cubs separated from their mothers rarely survived, especially when injured. "Is the cub still alive?" she asked, already reaching for her rescue kit. "Yes, but barely. It dragged itself near the restroom area. I didn't want to touch it, didn't know if I'd make things worse." "You did the right thing. We're on our way. Please stay there and keep an eye on it from a distance." Margaret grabbed her colleague, Dr. James Patterson, a veterinarian who'd worked with the Conservation Center for 15 years. They loaded the rescue van with medical supplies, transport carriers, and the specialized equipment needed for handling wild cats. The 30-mile drive to the gas station felt endless, with Margaret's mind racing through possible scenarios and treatment protocols. When they arrived, they found the caller, a truck driver named Robert Martinez, standing guard near the restroom building. His large frame seemed almost protective as he pointed toward a small drainage pipe. "She's in there," Robert said softly. "Haven't seen her move in the last 10 minutes." Margaret approached slowly, her movements deliberate and calm. Years of experience had taught her that injured wild animals could be unpredictable. But what she saw made her breath catch. The bobcat cub, no more than 12 weeks old, lay curled in a pitiful ball. Her spotted coat was matted with blood along her left side, and her hind leg was positioned at an unnatural angle. "Oh, little one," Margaret whispered, crouching low to appear less threatening. The cub's amber eyes flickered open at the sound. Instead of the expected hiss or defensive posture, the small creature let out a weak mew that sounded almost like a plea. Margaret had rescued dozens of bobcats over her 20-year career, but she'd never seen one so young respond to human presence with such desperate trust. Dr. Patterson joined her with the transport carrier. "Severe trauma to the left hindquarter," he observed quietly. "Possible internal injuries. We need to move fast." With practiced efficiency, they worked together to gently coax the cub into the padded carrier. What happened next stunned them both. The injured cub, despite obvious pain, weakly pressed her small head against Margaret's gloved hand, a gesture so reminiscent of a domestic kitten seeking comfort that tears sprang to Margaret's eyes. "I've never seen anything like that," Dr. Patterson murmured. "Wild bobcats they just don't do that." Robert, who had been watching anxiously, stepped forward. "Will she make it?" Margaret secured the carrier and stood. "We'll do everything we can. Thank you for calling us and staying with her." The truck driver's weathered face creased with concern. "I've got a granddaughter about her size. Well, human size, you know what I mean. Couldn't just leave her here." He paused. "Would it be okay if I called to check on her?" Margaret smiled and handed him a card. "We'd be happy to keep you updated." The drive back to the conservation center was tense. Dr. Patterson monitored the cub while Margaret navigated the winding mountain roads. The little Bobcat had fallen into a shock-induced stupor, her breathing shallow but steady. At the center, they immediately transferred her to the medical facility. The examination revealed the full extent of her injuries: a fractured femur, severe bruising along her ribcage, and multiple lacerations. But miraculously, no internal bleeding or organ damage. "She's lucky," Dr. Patterson said as he prepared for surgery. "Another few inches to the right, and that car would have—" He didn't finish the sentence. Margaret assisted with the surgery, which took 3 hours. They set the broken bone with specialized pins that would allow it to heal properly while still permitting some movement during recovery. Throughout the procedure, Margaret found herself unusually invested in this particular patient. Maybe it was the way the cub had sought comfort, or perhaps the image of her trying desperately to follow her family across that dangerous highway. When the cub woke from anesthesia, Margaret was there with a small dish of water and minced rabbit meat. The cub's eyes, still cloudy from medication, focused on her face. "Hello, little warrior," Margaret said softly. "You're safe now." To her amazement, the cub attempted to purr, a raspy, broken sound that barely resembled the vocalization, but unmistakably an attempt at communication. Wild bobcats could purr, but they rarely did so in the presence of humans. Over the following days, a routine developed. Margaret would arrive early each morning to check on the cub, whom the staff had begun calling Luna because of the crescent-shaped white marking on her chest. Luna's appetite, initially poor due to trauma and medication, gradually improved. By day 5, she was eagerly anticipating mealtimes, her eyes brightening whenever Margaret entered the recovery room. "She's getting too comfortable with us," warned Jennifer, one of the junior rehabilitators. "We can't let her imprint on humans if she's going to be released." Margaret knew Jennifer was right. The goal was always to maintain the wild nature of their patients, ensuring they could survive once returned to their natural habitat. But Luna presented unique challenges. Her injuries required extensive hands-on care, and her young age meant she was still in a critical socialization period. Dr. Patterson developed a treatment plan that balanced necessary human interaction with maintaining Luna's wild instincts. They used specialized feeding tools that didn't require direct hand contact, played recorded bobcat vocalizations to keep her connected to her species, and limited verbal communication during care sessions. But Luna seemed determined to forge connections despite their efforts. On day 8, when Margaret entered for the morning feeding, she found Luna had dragged her favorite toy, a stuffed rabbit used for play therapy, to the corner of her enclosure nearest the door, as if waiting to show it off. "You're going to be trouble, aren't you?" Margaret said, unable to suppress a smile. Luna responded with an enthusiastic chirp and attempted to stand on her injured leg. The effort was premature, and she tumbled sideways, but her determination was evident. She immediately tried again, this time managing a wobbly 3-legged stance. The rehabilitation process was painstaking. Each day brought new challenges and small victories. Physical therapy sessions were crucial for Luna's recovery. Margaret and the team developed an innovative approach using laser pointers and feather wands to encourage movement without direct interaction. Luna proved to be an eager participant, her natural hunting instincts overcoming her physical limitations. On day 12, Robert Martinez, the truck driver who'd found her, visited the center. They couldn't allow him direct contact with Luna, but Margaret arranged for him to observe through the one-way glass of the observation room. "She looks so much better," Robert said, his voice thick with emotion as he watched Luna attempt to pounce on a motorized toy mouse. "Still favoring that leg, though." "The bones are healing well," Margaret explained, "but it'll be weeks before she has full mobility. The real challenge will be ensuring she can hunt effectively once she's released." Robert was quiet for a moment. What if she can't? What happens to bobcats that can't be released? It was a question Margaret had been trying not to think about. "We have connections with accredited facilities that can provide permanent homes for non-releasable animals, but we're not giving up on Luna returning to the wild. She's young, and young animals have remarkable healing capabilities." As if understanding the conversation, Luna looked directly at the observation window and let out a demanding yowl. It was feeding time, and she wasn't patient about delays. By day 15, Luna's personality was fully emerging. She was curious, playful, and surprisingly vocal for a bobcat. The staff learned to interpret her various sounds: the chirp that meant she was happy, the low growl that indicated frustration with her physical limitations, and the peculiar warbling purr she made during grooming sessions. The grooming was necessary due to her injuries, but it posed a dilemma. Luna couldn't properly clean her wounds, and infection was a constant risk. Margaret developed a system using long-handled brushes and medical wipes, maintaining some distance while providing necessary care. But Luna had other ideas. During one session, she managed to grab the brush handle with her teeth, pulling it, and Margaret's hand, closer, then rubbing her head against Margaret's gloved fingers with obvious affection. "We're walking a tightrope here," Dr. Patterson observed during a staff meeting. "She needs extensive human care to survive, but too much habituation will doom her chances of successful release." They decided to gradually introduce more wild-appropriate behaviors. Dead prey items replaced the processed meat diet. They installed motion-activated feeders that would dispense food at random intervals, mimicking the unpredictability of hunting. Most importantly, they began reducing human presence during active hours, shifting care activities to times when Luna would naturally be resting. The strategy showed mixed results. Luna adapted quickly to the feeding changes, showing excellent hunting instincts when presented with puzzle feeders that required her to catch her meal. But she remained remarkably attuned to human presence, often positioning herself where she could watch staff members through the enclosure windows. On day 20, Luna achieved a milestone. She successfully climbed to the elevated platform in her enclosure using all 4 legs. The achievement came during a moment when she thought no one was watching. Those security cameras captured everything. She sat on the platform with obvious pride, surveying her domain like the wild predator she was meant to be. Margaret felt a complex mix of joy and impending loss. Each improvement brought Luna closer to release, closer to leaving the safe haven where she'd been nurtured back to health. 6 weeks into her recovery, Luna faced her biggest challenge yet. The team introduced live prey training, essential for determining whether she could successfully hunt despite her injury. The test used specially raised feeder mice in a controlled environment that simulated natural hunting conditions. The first attempt was a failure. Luna's injured leg, though healed, still lacked the explosive power needed for a successful pounce. She missed the mouse entirely, tumbling awkwardly and retreating to her den in obvious frustration. "Maybe we're pushing too hard," Jennifer suggested during the debrief. "She might need more time." But Margaret had observed something others missed. Luna hadn't given up after her fall. She'd watched the mouse escape, her eyes tracking its movement with intense focus. She was learning, adapting. The second attempt, 3 days later, showed marked improvement. Luna had developed a new technique, using the enclosure walls to brace herself during the pounce. She caught the mouse on her third try, dispatching it with the swift efficiency that was hardwired into her DNA. "Remarkable," Dr. Patterson said, reviewing the footage. "She's compensating for her weakness by adapting her hunting strategy. That's actually better than normal recovery. She's not just healing, she's evolving." Word of Luna's progress spread through the local wildlife rehabilitation community. She became something of a poster child for adaptive recovery, demonstrating that animals could overcome significant injuries with proper support and their own determination. Robert Martinez remained a faithful supporter, visiting every 2 weeks and eventually bringing his granddaughter Emily during one of the center's educational open houses. Though they couldn't see Luna directly, she was kept away from public view to maintain her wild nature. Margaret shared stories and videos of her progress. "She's like a superhero," 8-year-old Emily declared after watching footage of Luna successfully hunting. "She got hurt, but didn't give up." "That's exactly right," Margaret agreed. "Sometimes the strongest creatures are the ones who learn to overcome their challenges." As autumn approached, the team faced the crucial decision about Luna's future. 3 months of intensive rehabilitation had transformed her from a critically injured cub to a young bobcat with adapted but functional hunting skills. She'd gained appropriate weight, demonstrated wild behaviors, and showed healthy wariness of unfamiliar humans, though she still perked up whenever Margaret entered the facility. The release evaluation was comprehensive. Luna needed to demonstrate sustained hunting success, appropriate fear responses to threats, and the ability to navigate varied terrain despite her permanent slight limp. Over 2 weeks, she passed every test, though not always on the first try. Her determination seemed boundless. "She's ready," Dr. Patterson announced after the final evaluation. Her hunting success rate is actually above average for her age group. That adapted technique she developed? It's given her an advantage in certain situations. The release was scheduled for early October, time to give Luna the best chance of establishing territory before winter. The location was carefully chosen, a protected area with abundant prey, water sources, and notably, an existing bobcat population that included several females with cubs. There was a chance, however slim, that Luna might find her original family group. The week before release, Margaret found herself spending extra time near Luna's enclosure. She knew she was breaking protocol, but something compelled her to give this special patient a proper goodbye. Luna seemed to sense the change, becoming more vocal during Margaret's visits, often positioning herself as close to the barrier as possible. On the final night, Margaret sat outside the enclosure after completing the evening feeding. Luna, instead of retreating to her den as usual, remained visible, grooming herself in a patch of moonlight. Their eyes met through the fencing, and Luna made that distinctive warbling purr she'd developed during her recovery. "You're going to be just fine out there," Margaret whispered. "You're the strongest little warrior I've ever met." Luna tilted her head, as if considering the words, then stood and performed a perfect stretch, demonstrating the fluid movement that had once seemed impossible. She padded to her den with the confident gait of a wild predator, pausing once to look back with those amber eyes that had first pleaded for help and now blazed with wild independence. Release day dawned clear and cool. The team transported Luna in a specialized carrier to the release site, a meadow bordered by dense forest and rocky outcroppings perfect for bobcat habitat. Robert Martinez had taken the day off work to be there, standing with Emily and Margaret as Dr. Patterson prepared to open the carrier. "Remember," Margaret told Emily, "when that door opens, Luna might run immediately or might take her time. Either way is perfectly normal." The door swung open. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then Luna's spotted head emerged, ears swiveling to catch every sound. She stepped out cautiously, favoring her injured leg slightly but moving with purpose. 20 feet from the carrier, she paused and looked back at the gathered humans. Margaret held her breath. This was the moment that would reveal whether they'd succeeded in maintaining Luna's wild nature while saving her life. Luna held the gaze for several heartbeats, then made a sound. Not the warbling purr of captivity, but a wild bobcat's chirp, a sound that seemed to carry both acknowledgement and farewell. Then she was gone, melting into the underbrush with the fluid grace of her kind, leaving only swaying ferns to mark her passage. "Will we ever know if she makes it?" Emily asked, wiping tears from her cheeks. "We've given her every chance," Margaret replied, her own eyes moist. "She's got tracking chips, so we'll get occasional data. But the best sign will be no news. It'll mean she's living wild and free, just as she should be." 6 months later, during a routine camera trap survey of the release area, a familiar figure appeared in the footage. Luna, her coat thick with winter fur, moved confidently through the frame. The slight hitch in her gait was barely noticeable. More remarkably, the timestamp showed early morning hours and her belly was full. Clear evidence of successful hunting. Margaret received the footage on a particularly difficult day, after losing another patient they couldn't save. Watching Luna thrive in her natural habitat reminded her why they did this work. Every animal deserved a chance, and sometimes, with enough dedication, skill, and love, they could provide that chance. Dr. Patterson found her reviewing the footage for the 5th time. "She made it," he said simply. "She did more than that," Margaret replied. "She showed us that healing isn't always about returning to exactly what you were before. Sometimes it's about becoming something even stronger." A year after Luna's release, the Conservation Center received an unexpected donation from Robert Martinez. His note explained that he'd started a small fund in Luna's honor to help other injured wildlife get the second chance she'd received. Emily had contributed her allowance money and made hand-drawn posters for a fundraising campaign at her school. The fund grew beyond anyone's expectations, eventually supporting the construction of a new specialized rehabilitation enclosure designed specifically for young predators requiring extended care. They named it the Luna Wildlife Recovery Unit. During the dedication ceremony, Margaret shared Luna's story with the gathered supporters. She spoke of the frightened cub who'd sought comfort from humans, the determined patient who'd learned to hunt despite her injuries, and the wild bobcat who'd returned to her rightful place in nature. Luna taught us that the bond between humans and wildlife doesn't have to be one of distance and fear, Margaret concluded. With respect, knowledge, and compassion, we can help without harming, save without taming, and love without possessing. Every animal that passes through these doors carries that lesson forward. As if on cue, a distinctive chirp echoed from the nearby forest. The gathered crowd fell silent, scanning the tree line. For just a moment, a pair of amber eyes gleamed from the shadows before disappearing into the deepening dusk. It might have been any bobcat. The mountains were full of them after all. But Margaret knew better. Luna had come home, not to stay, but to remind them that the wild persists adapts, and thrives when given the chance. And sometimes, just sometimes, it remembers the helping hands that made survival possible. The Luna Wildlife Recovery Unit has since treated dozens of injured predators, each receiving the same dedicated care that saved a small bobcat cub on a foggy morning. And though none have quite matched Luna's unique personality, each success story adds another chapter to the ongoing tale of human compassion and nature's resilience. Margaret still keeps a photo on her desk, a blurry security camera image of a young bobcat touching her nose to a gloved hand. It serves as a daily reminder that in the space between wild and tame, between human and nature, miracles of healing and hope continue to unfold. And somewhere in the California mountains, a bobcat with a slight limp and an indomitable spirit continues to write her own wild story, forever changed but ultimately unbroken.